Mark had always believed in stability. His life was like a well-oiled Swiss watch. Every cog in its place, every movement predictable. He'd been a software engineer at a reputable tech company in Seattle for 15 years. The salary allowed for a comfortable life, nothing extravagant, but never wanting for anything. A house in the suburbs, an annual vacation to Maui, evenings spent watching TV, and weekends at the lake house. A typical American dream, which he'd considered ideal. His wife, Catherine, was his rock, his safe harbor. They'd met in college, navigated their student years together, the first steps in their careers, the birth of their son, Alex. Their relationship, it seemed, was carved from granite, strong, unbreakable. He was convinced of its permanence, that they were grown together and nothing could ever separate them. But life, as it turns out, has a knack for throwing the most unexpected curveballs. Sometimes those surprises shatter everything you believed was solid into tiny fragments. For Mark, that curveball was a sentence uttered by Catherine one evening, as he, as usual, sat in front of the TV flipping channels. "I want a divorce, Mark." The words were calm, devoid of emotion, almost mundane, and it was this very ordinariness that cut the deepest. There were no tears, no hysterics, no accusations. Just a cold, calculated statement that turned his world upside down. He didn't understand. How? Why? When? Everything had been so good, hadn't it? But Catherine just shook her head. "Mark, we've been strangers for a long time. We're living like roommates, not a husband and wife. You're absent, even when you're here. I'm tired." That phrase, "you're absent," hit him hard. He really had been absorbed in his work processes lately, lost in the virtual world of code and algorithms. The shared conversations had disappeared, the evening walks, even simple touches. Everything had been replaced by routine and a silence he'd somehow mistaken for peace. The divorce turned out to be quick and painless from a legal standpoint. They didn't have any major financial disputes. Their son Alex was already an adult, living in a dorm in another city. All that remained was emptiness. Emptiness in the house, emptiness in Mark's soul. Every corner, every object reminded him of Catherine. Her favorite mug in the kitchen, her books on the shelf, even the scent of her perfume, which seemed to still linger in the air. The house, once the fortress of their love, had become his personal prison. He walked through it like a ghost, unable to find solace. Work offered no relief. He mechanically completed tasks, but his thoughts constantly returned to the past, to lost happiness, to what he might have been able to change. Friends tried to support him, invited him out for beers, for fishing trips, but Mark felt like an outsider in their cheerful company. He couldn't share his pain, his emptiness. He just nodded, smiled, hiding a true storm within. At night, he couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their life, searching for answers that never came. Why hadn't he noticed? Why hadn't he fought? Why had he let this happen? The feeling of his own inadequacy, of failure, gnawed at him from the inside. He felt like a rusty, abandoned car, never to run again. One evening, aimlessly browsing the internet, he stumbled upon an advertisement for a vintage car. Not just any car, but a Volkswagen Beetle, a 1970s model, with its distinctive rounded shape and air-cooled engine. Something about that ad caught his eye. Perhaps it was nostalgia. His grandfather, God rest his soul, had owned a similar Beetle. Mark remembered how, as a child, his grandpa would take him to the garage, how they'd twist wrenches together, how his grandpa taught him that anything, if you put your hands and heart into it, can become new again. At the time, Mark hadn't given those words much thought, but now, in this void, they resonated like a revelation, like hope. It was an impulsive move, almost an act of desperation. He drove to see the car the next day. What stood before him was little more than a metal shell. Rust, a dented body, missing headlights, a torn interior, an engine barely hanging on. A pathetic sight. But looking at it, Mark suddenly felt a strange surge of energy. He saw something more than just a piece of junk in this old metal. He saw potential. The possibility of creating something from nothing. Bringing back to life something that seemed long past its prime. Perhaps, in doing so, he could bring himself back to life as well. That day, he bought the Beetle. It wasn't just a car, it was a beginning. The start of a new era in his life, one he had no idea about yet. A symbol of his own future resurrection. He felt a spark of hope ignite within him for the first time in months. This spark, just born, began to flare into a flame. He didn't know where this path would lead him, but he felt it was the only path worth trying. The first few days after buying the Beetle were pure chaos. Mark felt like a child who had picked up a complex toy for the first time, unsure where to begin. His knowledge of cars was limited to checking the oil and changing a tire. He had never delved into mechanics, didn't know how an engine worked or what made up a suspension system. But the desire to bring this piece of metal back to life was stronger than any fear or uncertainty. He started by organizing his workspace. The garage, which until then had served only as a storage space for old junk, transformed into his personal workshop. He bought a basic set of tools, wrenches, screwdrivers, a hammer, pliers, then a compressor, a spray gun, a welding machine. Each tool seemed like a strange, unfamiliar beast to him. He spent hours watching YouTube tutorials, reading automotive forums, searching for information in old repair manuals. His mind, once immersed in the world of programming, now fully shifted to the world of metal, rust, and mechanics. The first step was a complete disassembly. It was a long and exhausting process. He removed every part, every bolt, every nut. Some elements were so rusted that it required incredible effort, special penetrating oils, even an angle grinder. Mark sorted the parts into separate containers, labeled them to avoid confusion. Every evening, he returned home tired, dirty, but with a strange, new sense of satisfaction. The physical labor, which he was unaccustomed to, helped distract him from the pain and worries. The scent of grease, rust, old metal, and later body filler and paint became almost therapeutic for him. He stopped thinking about Catherine, about the divorce, about the past. His mind was entirely absorbed by the task: how to remove that seized bolt, how to restore this component, how to find a rare part. A particular challenge was the search for parts. For a vintage Volkswagen Beetle, this was not as simple as it seemed. Many parts were no longer manufactured. Mark spent hours at automotive swap meets, visited old auto repair shops, placed ads in local papers. Some parts had to be ordered from other states, waiting weeks for delivery. Some he had to fabricate himself. He learned to work with a welding machine, mastered the nuances of metalworking, learned to use body filler and sand to prepare surfaces for painting. His hands, once accustomed only to a keyboard, were now covered in calluses, cuts, and scratches. But this didn't bother him. On the contrary, every mark was a testament to his progress, his immersion in this new endeavor. Mark decided to share his restoration process. He began posting photos and short descriptions on his Facebook blog. At first, they were just photos for himself, a kind of personal diary. But over time, people began to take notice. They commented, asked questions, expressed admiration for his courage and perseverance. "Awesome! You're doing great! I'll follow the project! Is it difficult?" Such messages became an unexpected source of support for Mark. He felt that his work mattered not only to himself, but also to others who were following his progress. Some even offered help, sharing advice and experience, which was invaluable to him. One encounter, in particular, became very significant. While he was searching for parts at a swap meet, an elderly man with a kind smile approached him. "Looks like you're wrestling with a Beetle," he said, nodding at Mark's latest find, an antique carburetor. "I used to do the same, worked on them for years." It turned out that this man, Peter Swanson, was a retired mechanic who had specialized in Volkswagens for decades. He knew everything about them, every bolt, every nuance, every quirk. Peter Swanson became more than just a consultant to Mark. He became a true mentor. He shared invaluable knowledge, helped find rare parts, told stories from the early days of Volkswagen and the people who built these cars. Their meetings in the garage became regular. Peter Swanson not only helped with technical questions, but also simply listened to Mark when he needed to talk. He became a bridge between Mark's past, his memories of his grandfather, and his present, filled with a new purpose. He brought warmth and humanity into Mark's life, which he so desperately needed. Every success, every restored part, every tightened bolt, every rectified defect, it was a small victory. Mark felt that, along with the Beetle, his own soul was being restored. He was learning to dream again, to set goals, to find joy in small things. The manual labor, the focus on concrete, tangible results, proved to be the best medicine for his inner emptiness. He no longer felt like an abandoned car. He felt like a craftsman capable of giving new life. Months, filled with tireless work, turned into years. The Beetle gradually shed its rusty skin of the past, regaining its original, vibrant appearance, and in some places even surpassing it. Mark meticulously restored every single element. The body was carefully straightened, filled, and sanded to a perfect smoothness. He chose a bright, rich yellow color for it, the color of sunshine, the color of joy, which symbolized a new beginning for him. The interior received new upholstery. The seats were restitched, the dashboard gleamed, and the sparkling chrome on the bumpers and trim reflected the light like diamonds. Mark wasn't just restoring a car. He was pouring a part of himself into it, his energy, his soul. Every single part passed through his hands. Every bolt was tightened with special care. He learned to be patient, persistent, and precise. He realized that restoration wasn't just mechanical work. It was an art form. It was the ability to see beauty in the broken, potential in the rusted, life in the seemingly dead. And then came the day when all the parts were assembled, all the systems checked. Mark walked up to the Beetle, inserted the key into the ignition, and turned it. His heart pounded wildly. The moment of truth. He started the engine, and it roared to life. First a little cough, then it ran smoothly, with its characteristic yet long-awaited sound. It was a triumph, a loud but so desirable sound. Mark felt goosebumps run down his arms, tears welled up in his eyes. It was a feeling of absolute victory, a sense that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. It wasn't just an engine starting, it was the engine of his own life starting up again. Photos of the finished Beetle created a sensation on his blog. Comments poured in, and the number of likes went through the roof. "This is incredible! What a beauty! Golden hands! This is a masterpiece!" People were amazed, asking how long the restoration took, how he did it, what paint he used, where they found the parts. Some even offered to buy it for a significant sum. But Mark refused. This Beetle wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of his own rebirth. It was his first step on a new path. Thanks to his social media posts, other people began to contact Mark, asking him to restore their vintage cars. At first, they were isolated requests. An old Ford pickup truck that a grandfather had left to his grandson, a Chevrolet Bel Air that had been sitting in a garage for 30 years. Then there were more and more. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages came in daily. Mark realized that his hobby had turned into something more. This could be his new career, his calling. He quit his old job. It was risky, as he was leaving a stable income and a familiar way of life. But he felt it was the only right step. He opened his own workshop, naming it Revive Classics. Even his son, Alex, who had initially been skeptical of his father's new passion, started coming to the workshop during breaks from college, helping out, learning. He saw a new man in his father, happy, enthusiastic, full of energy, with a sparkle in his eyes that he hadn't seen in years. Their relationship improved. They found common ground again. Mark restored old Ford Mustangs, Chevrolet Corvettes, searched for rare Cadillacs, even a vintage German pre-war car that had survived World War II and miraculously endured. Each car had its own story, its own soul, its own secrets that Mark unraveled. And as Mark worked on them, he felt his own soul healing, feeling filled with new meaning. He wasn't just repairing metal, he was bringing memories, emotions, and a connection to the past back to life, to the people who once owned these cars. One day, Catherine visited his workshop. She had seen his social media posts, heard about his success from mutual acquaintances, and decided to come by. She entered quietly, like a shadow, and stopped by the door. Mark was engrossed in his work, bent over the engine of an old Chevrolet pickup, his hands greasy, his face smudged, but his eyes held that same sparkle she hadn't seen in him for many years, even before their divorce. He looked up and saw her. There was no surprise, no awkwardness, just a faint smile. "Hi, Catherine," he said, wiping his hands with a rag. She didn't say a word, just stood and looked at him, at the workshop, at these gleaming, reborn cars. "Are you happy?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air compressor. Mark smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Yes, Catherine, very. You can't imagine how much." It wasn't a conversation about reconciliation or regret for what was lost. It was a conversation about acceptance, about the fact that each of them had found their own path, and this path, though different, had brought them both a unique kind of happiness. It was a conversation about how life goes on, and it can be amazing, even after the greatest upheavals. The Revive Classics workshop became not just a business, but a truly iconic place for vintage car enthusiasts. Collectors came to Mark from all corners of the country, and sometimes from abroad. He took on the most challenging projects, cars that other mechanics had given up on. Volkswagen Beetles transformed into gleaming showpieces. Ford Mustangs got a second wind, and old Chevrolet pickups amazed with their renewed luster while retaining their historical spirit. Each time, the results exceeded clients' expectations. His name became synonymous with quality, craftsmanship, and incredible patience. Mark realized that the divorce, which once seemed like the end of the world, had actually become a catalyst for a new beginning. It gave him a push, forced him out of his comfort zone, plunged him into the unknown, and helped him find himself, his true passions, which he had never even suspected before. He no longer felt like a victim of circumstances, but a creator of his own life, the master of his own destiny. It was a feeling of freedom he had never experienced before. His YouTube channel, which he started with enthusiasm, became a true phenomenon. He didn't just show the restoration process, he shared trade secrets, told fascinating stories of the cars, their biographies, the emotions associated with them. He showed all the stages, from rusty metal to a gleaming masterpiece. His charisma, sincerity, and passion for the craft attracted thousands, then hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Millions of people worldwide eagerly awaited each new episode. The comments section was overflowing with thanks for the inspiration, for the motivation, for showing how something that seemed lost could be restored. Over time, Mark found a new woman, Natalie. She was a photographer and had a passion for vintage items herself, their history, their uniqueness. From the first glance, she understood his passion for classic cars, supported him in everything, spending as much time in the workshop as he did, photographing every stage of the work, capturing the metal's transformation on camera. Next to her, Mark felt whole again, loved and desired. It was a different kind of love, mature, calm, but no less profound than his first. She became his muse, his support. His garage, once filled with pain, loneliness, and despair, was now a place where masterpieces were created. The scent of paint and grease, the clang of metal, the sound of a running engine, all of this became his music, his rhythm of life. He was not just a restorer, he was an artist who gave old cars a second life, and in parallel, his own. Every restored car was a part of his own story, his own revival. Mark continued to work on new projects, his YouTube channel thrived, and he was happy. Sometimes, when he looked at his first bright yellow Beetle, which stood in the corner of his workshop like a kind of talisman, he remembered the moment he bought it. Back then, it was an act of desperation, a last attempt to cling to something in a stormy sea. Now, it was a symbol of hope, a symbol that even from the greatest disappointment, one can emerge stronger, wiser, and happier. Every restored car was a part of his own story, his own revival. His story became an example for many. People wrote him letters, thanking him for the inspiration, sharing their own stories of how they found new passions, new paths, new lives after life's trials, divorces, losses, crises. Mark realized that his work, his passion, now served not only him, but others. He helped people believe in themselves, believe that life doesn't end after divorce, but on the contrary, it can open new, unexpected, wonderful horizons. Mark's story is not just a story about car restoration. It is a story about the restoration of the soul, about the rebirth of passion, about how to find yourself when everything seems lost. It is a story about how even in life's most difficult moments, you can find light if you put your hands and heart into what truly matters and believe in the power of transformation. He proved that even the deepest wounds can become a source of incredible strength and inspiration if you are willing to take responsibility for your life and start building it anew, brick by brick, part by part. Sometimes, to start a new life, you just need to find your old, rusty Volkswagen Beetle.